Hello, I'm Christopher Kazan, and this is Ireland's Edge. On today's episode, is there hope in the atom? We live in an energy crisis, with environmental catastrophe and war questioning our reliance on fossil fuels. Nuclear power was once the great green hope, but decades of concerns about accidents and radioactive waste have turned much of Europe off. But were those concerns overblown, and have they blinded us to a vital source of clean energy? In their new film Atomic Hope, filmmakers Frankie Fenton and Kathryn have collaborated with Finnish scientist Iida Ruishalme to explore the environmentalist pro-nuclear movement. At Ireland's Edge in Dingle, they spoke with Emmy award-winning filmmaker and Ireland's Edge founder, Nuala O'Connor.
I'd like to welcome Iida Ruishalme. Iida is a cell biologist, Finnish or Finnish-Swedish. Frankie Fenton and his partner Kathryn work together as documentary makers, producers and directors and God knows what else. And I like to think of this as a discussion about a discussion. It's very meta, very on trend, in the sense that the topic is nuclear power, and the title of your film, Frankie, is Atomic Hope, which I saw last June, I think, or July, and watched with some resistance, I have to say, to the whole idea of it, but by the end of it was completely of a different disposition, let's say. And of all of the words that one could put with atomic, one thinks bomb, explosion, warfare, atomic age, but not hope. So I'm going to start with you and ask you why you called it Atomic Hope.
Yeah, it's actually Kathryn came up with it.
Well, Kathryn.
Nice way
I don't know
to-
why I assumed Frankie came up with it. Kathryn.
Well, I'm a producer, so you're constantly trying to figure out how to, I suppose, market your film as well. And giving it, I think originally we had it as the good reactor, which was to denote the thorium molten salt reactors, which is what the original film was about. But the film had evolved and over 10 years became about the movement, the pro-nuclear movement that Iida is a part of. And what we really got from the activists that we were filming was just this great sense of hope from them. And then Atomic Hope just kind of sounded dynamic beside each other.
Well chosen, because it certainly is, draws the attention immediately. Now, the subtitle is Inside the Pro-Nuclear Movement.
Correct.
And you are inside the pro-nuclear movement, and you feature in that film.
Yes.
So, just talk me through your story, Iida, because, like I imagine almost everybody, the spectre of the bomb, the atomic bomb of 1945. Subsequent 3 Mile Island, Windscale, Sellafield, Chernobyl, Fukushima, 3 Mile Island, they are the spectres. So what we know of nuclear power, what we know of it, that's what we know. But we know nothing about it, actually. Because that's enough, we think, to know about it. It's dangerous, it's terrifying. Thanks very much, no thanks. So, I'm old enough to have gone to Carnsore a couple of times, was fully signed up, member of the anti-nuclear movement, had my Atom Shaft 9 Danke badge.
Do you still have it?
Yeah, I do.
Do you?
Yeah.
Okay.
And but I don't think I'll be taking it out again, maybe. Not with quite the same, doctrinaire aplomb as I had at that age. But just, you would have come from that. You're from Finland. Chernobyl, for example, the winds blew north after that explosion. You're about 600 miles from there. Tell me how you came to be inside the pro-nuclear movement.
Yeah, that's definitely not a place I expected to find myself ever, because the starting point was that nuclear is something really dangerous, really... there are so many cues from everywhere in our culture and families and friends, whenever it's mentioned or talked about, that it tells you, it rings the alarm bells right away. It's something that we should be really cautious with. It's simply sensible to be really careful and be aware that it has extraordinary risk. This was my starting point. And it wasn't really either something that I was interested in, because I'm a biologist and I'm interested in life and natural ecosystems. But at the point when I had my own children and they were small and I was getting more and more worried about climate change, it felt somehow more urgent, because suddenly I'm thinking about how will the world look like when they grow up and their children grow up. And then I realized that this thing with climate change, it's actually a lot about energy. Most of our emissions come from energy, and it's actually really important to our societies because of the things like hospitals and public transport, lighting in schools and warmth, everything runs on energy. So I was sort of reluctantly looking into it, and I was blown away by the realization that I had thought that I knew already enough to say we should never use it, because surely everybody knew this. This is simply how it is. And then I realized also that, wait, I'm a scientist and we don't just know things. Okay, let's look at this. And it was really difficult to make sense of the discussion at first because there are so many different viewpoints that you see in media and in discussions, and a lot of passionate people trying to say that we can do things one way or the other way, and you definitely don't need nuclear, or you absolutely need nuclear. So I realized that I have to look into it, and I tried to use my scientist background instead of this starting point of saying no thanks, and going to the most reliable sources I could find, IPCC and International Energy Agency and things like this, where there are really comprehensive reviews of it. And I really was taken aback by the fact that they were all saying that we really need nuclear power. We need to decarbonize our societies. We need loads and loads and loads of low carbon energy, and that actually, even in all the scenarios that we have, we're already, IPCC, for instance, is relying on methodologies that don't even exist yet, and a huge increase in nuclear power. So I had to go back and think about, okay, so why had I said no? And why were these places saying that we really need it? And during this it was a journey, because it wasn't like I stopped fearing nuclear power overnight, but I realized that fear isn't enough. I actually have to inform myself beyond that. And over the years that I was reading more and more about it, I realized that actually nuclear power was already providing us with the majority of Europe's low carbon energy, for instance. And that this is where I really love the term hope, because this is where the hope came in as well, because I needed to know for my children's sake that we actually have methods at our disposal, that we can do something about this. And I realized that here are lots of experts saying that, yes, this is one of the important tools. We have it, we can use it a lot more. We have other sources, like the largest one is hydropower. That's the world's largest low-carbon energy source. But not, even in the European Union, that's actually second to nuclear power. And we can't just make more hydropower opportunities appear. That's how much water you have falling from high places. You can take care of those. That is not without everything has its drawbacks as well. But yeah, I realized that actually we have another form that we can use a lot more, and that we can make huge, really long, generation-long contributions to, that my children and their children can actually have reliable low-carbon energy.
Frankie, you then come into this story. You started out to make a documentary looking at thorium.
Yeah.
And you realised that nobody was going to be interested.
Yeah, pretty much. It was really hard.
Should I say?
No, totally. I mean, originally I came from an anthropology, sociology background, and then kind of did film in college, and then I worked in post-production in London on television shows that I didn't really like at the time. They were like, Britain's Got Talent and X Factor, that kind of thing. And I really was kind of questioning my life every single day, kind of going, why am I doing this, And I'd call around to my sister's house and she's watching X Factor, and I'd go, turn it off. And she's like, well, just get into it. Stop being so cynical. And I was like, no, it's destroying the world. So what I wanted to do was to make a big film about something like food or pharmaceuticals or something that would have an impact. And my good friend Des, handed me an article in Wired magazine in 2009. It's a long time ago. And in it basically said about this thing called thorium, which you mentioned, which is using thorium instead of uranium in these nuclear reactors, which we have stopped using. we kind of used them experimentally kind of in the 60s and then just stopped. And I was like, this sounds really interesting. This seemed to answer all the problems that we had with nuclear power, like proliferation, safety, waste. And some of those things were kind of true and some of them weren't. But I kind of got the bug that perhaps if this seemed to answer a lot of the problems that we have, then, like Iida says, there's hope. There's kind of, some more people need to know about this. So I decided to try and make a film, but no one would give me money. Because it's like, why would you make a I mean, we've already decided it's over. It's,
Yeah, this is the problem with this topic, isn't it? This subject.
Yeah.
So you're involved in, coming to terms with your own feelings about nuclear power and then getting involved in a pro-nuclear campaign, which itself is difficult. It's difficult to get airtime for this. It's difficult to get into the spaces where the climate change people are, or where even the industry is, and that's another story, the actual nuclear industry itself. But then you're making a film about a subject that is finding it difficult to be talked about. So you're both, so you took forever to make this film.
Well, yeah, I did. I mean, okay, so what happened then was I did a Kickstarter appeal, and that actually gained traction because the people who kind of knew what the hell I was talking about were outliers and weirdos and nerds all out on the internet who in 2012 were like, yeah, that guy, that's what we need to make a film about this thing. So I earned enough money to, now in retrospect, having made documentaries, it was way too little money. But it ended up being development money. I basically made a documentary called The Good Reactor about this thing called thorium, and it was fine. It was like basically physicists, like for want of a better term, pale male, stale guys in front of bookcases, explaining in convoluted and, esoteric terms about why these particular reactors are different. And of course, that wasn't very interesting to a very broad and kind of, and this subject matter is something that needs to be fed to. Well, the grannies on my road need to understand what the hell they're talking about, as well as my kids on that,
So where were you coming from yourself in the terms of your attitude to nuclear power? Are you, Kathryn, were you involved in the thorium documentary?
Frankie showed that to me back in 2012 or 13, and we decided that it wasn't going to go anywhere because it was shaped in a way that was very kind of, like you say, long-winded and everything. But then we went and made another film together called It's Not Yet Dark about a filmmaker called Simon Fitzmaurice who wrote and directed a film through eye gaze technology. And that was about communicating sort of a science or a perspective by humanizing a subject. And we took what we learned from that with Simon because there was an awful lot we had to consider in that in terms of people's own perceptions of what Simon's choices should have been and how he should live his life and, why would he make a film through eye gaze technology and all this sort of stuff that we had to humanize for that film. So then we looked at the subject of nuclear energy, which was like yourself, I strongly identified as an anti-nuclear person. And it was really kind of interesting to me to realize that my opinion had actually become something that I identified as, and which then became something that when I questioned it, it sort of threw a lot of stuff out. And I thought this really needs to be challenged in a public way, because everybody is so staunchly anti-nuclear. So we decided to look at the people that we were filming and that Frankie was filming and kind of see what they were saying. And when we just focused on them and their messages and the science kind of came through their messages of hope, I suppose, it became more like science communication through people, I suppose. Does that sound?
Yeah, no, that's
yeah.
exactly. It seems like very challenging work, both in terms of making the film, but also the work itself. That it is so difficult to actually get a hearing. I'd recommend any of you that couldn't see the film to watch it because it is clearly so difficult to be accepted in the places. There's some heart-rending scenes where you're trying to get a platform just to have the discussion. What is really depressing about this film is that the inability of people with fixed ideas to actually even consider, not that they would change their minds even, but that they would even allow the discussion at all to take place. That's almost
There's an element of
incomprehensible.
that, because I think like it is about humanizing. Like for me, it was okay. Let's point the camera at people who are able to communicate, who are able to communicate the science properly, and these were the people who were actual environmentalists, and who were coming from a place of wanting to preserve the biosphere, people who really cared about children and who cared about the decisions that we're going to make into the future, and who actually had a kind of a message of hope. But we are told, like every day, that we are living in a divided world, and it's getting more and more divided. And I don't know about yous, but I think that's kind of BS. I think there's way more that we agree on than we disagree on.
Yeah.
And, I think starting from that point of view is the key to all of this, like all of our issues.
This how it's about communication, because for me, I have this scientist background and I'm very comfortable writing texts and looking at research papers and stuff like this. But then when I realized that, for me too, the opening to the discussion was crucial that I had people who I trusted who actually gave me the curiosity to even start looking like, hey, actually, it might not be that black and white. There might be some, really good ways of handling nuclear waste, for instance. And then I realized that, okay, so all this data that I started looking at, it was because I was ready, I was interested, I was open at looking at it. But to be able to get to that point, it's not enough that I, send people lots of links or say this data says this, but that you actually need to have a human being, a person who you realize, like, why is this person here? Why is this important? Why should I listen? And that's when I had to sort of push myself from my comfort zone, thinking that, okay, so when my kids grow up and look at me in the eye and say, why is the world like this? Why didn't you do anything? That I can say, I did try something, and that I actually go and have these discussions. And it's very scary at first, because I felt the only narrative I've heard was the one which was very loud anti-nuclear, very loud fear message. And it's horrible to tell someone, don't be afraid, it doesn't work. They still have their fear, so it's, what do I say? But what really surprised me was that my idea about how divided it is was also not quite accurate, actually. I realized that there are very loud voices against it, but when I actually went to places like UN climate meeting and talked to people outside meetings and demonstrations and on the streets, and that most people were actually not very strongly for or against. They had not really thought about it a lot, and most of them were actually curious and actually they said like, oh wow, I didn't know that, or really, maybe I'll look into that.
So you think fear is not the driver, in fact?
I think that there's lots of fear, but I think that it's the natural first cautious, starting point. And that it's not necessarily for all of us something that's very hardwired into our identity. That there's a lot of people who have just assumed that this must be it, but that they're actually open to listening if you put yourself out there and say that, please consider this. It's important, so it's not that you can tell somebody this is it and just accept the facts as I tell you, but just to say there's lots of information on it. Actually, a lot of it is not easy to find. Please be open at looking at it.
That brings me on to what's not known, not just about the science, but about the actual distribution of nuclear power in the world. So this, as I understand, Russia, China, India are all busily still, and I think South Korea, still busily building nuclear generators. And in fact, if you want to order a nuclear generator, they're the places to go. Whereas the Americans and the Germans particularly are decommissioning as fast as the others are building. So it's an interesting and probably little surveyed world, even for just the general reading public. Is that true?
So that's kind of like, from my perspective, was okay. We had this fear thing and kind of the lack of knowledge, and like for me, it was this. Like, did 1 million people die in Chernobyl or 140? And you kind of go through all these different phases, and then you realize then that, okay, so what is happening in the world? And you look at your pie and you see that 83% of the world's fossil fuel run, and you see that has gone nowhere, like for the last 20, 30 years. It's stayed like that, and it is continuing to stay like that. So in that little segment is nuclear and renewables, say. And we have to replace this whole chunk, right? So we have, so what's happened with nuclear power, and what has been happening has been, we have been decommissioning them at a rate of, where we have nuclear power plants that aren't meant to be closed down for another, say, 20, 30, 40 years' time. So these are early closures. And that was the first protocol. So we even have the likes of Greta Thunberg talking 2 weeks ago saying, perhaps we should stop closing them early, number one, which is what Germany has been doing.
But interestingly, the decision in Germany, which dates from 2011, is Fukushima related. So literally within months of Fukushima.
So like a year before Fukushima happened, I went to Germany and just happened to be there with pals, and I had a little camcorder, and one of the housemates said, do you want to come outside? We're going for there's a big protest on outside. And I was like, oh yeah, let's go. And it was like just tens of thousands of people on the streets. I was like, what's going on? And it was an anti-nuclear protest. It was 250,000 people who were just like, close it down. I was like, wow, people are and this is at the same time where I was kind of starting to learn about thorium and all that kind of stuff. I was like, do they know about thorium? Excuse me. But no one would listen to me. But but the thing is that so once Fukushima happened, I mean, that was like, of course, bloody close them. I mean, like, now will you listen to us? So it was already happening in Germany. It was such a, and I think when we think about these situations about Germany closing, Germany has been trying to show the world how to do things. And to be fair to Germany, Germany said, if we can get rid of nuclear power and run this whole shebang on renewables, then we should do it, and we should show the world how to do it. And yeah, they gave it the best shot ever, and they're still trying to do it. But it's failed. I mean, they're burning more coal now than they've ever burnt, right? So there's an element of, we have to just take a step back and stop pointing fingers, because everyone who's talking about this game is coming at it from a place of love. They're doing it in a place of trying to make the world a better place, and we're finding out in real time methods that are working and methods that aren't.
And what I think is really interesting about Germany is that, as you said, it was so many people were against it, so strongly against it. There was lots of fear, and the most amazing thing is that now that different things have come up, more climate change is talked about more. The war has changed completely, the realization of energy security actually being at risk. All of these points have led to the fact that the German population that was so against it back then, that you would have thought that this will never come up as something positive in Germany again. Now actually, there's been lots of polls in the last 2 years. Most of Germans are in favor of continued use of nuclear power.
But they only have 3 generators left.
Yeah.
Out of 17 from 2011.
Yeah, exactly. They have ramped up incredibly their renewables and end up only replacing nuclear and then having to add some coal. So it's like
coal is replacing.
This fight is against fossil fuels.
It's lignite, so it's brown coal, which is the worst of the worst of the worst of the worst. And in the film, we go out. You might remember, we go out to the lignite mines near the Hambach forest, where they're just churning up these like ancient forests.
Yeah, ancient forest, and turning it into this dystopian black landscape, monstrous machines. It's incredible. Yeah.
So there's a lot of kind of things that are, that we can look at in the world today and panic and go, oh my God, how are we going to get ourselves out of this? And then, if you're in a burning house and someone is screaming like, panic, panic, and the house is on fire, or you've got someone going, okay, everybody stand up, there's a door here, I want to listen to that person. I want, and there's people who are anti-nuclear, have really good reasons for being anti-nuclear, and that's fine. But, we also have people who are pro-nuclear who think that we have got real solutions and pathways out of, because literally in 28 years' time, we're going to have 10 billion people on the planet. And in that time, the current energy that we're using is going to double or triple. And some people say quadruple, but at least double the amount of energy that we're using. And so even getting what we have today, sorted out is a big mission, but kind of looking into the future, it's increasing. But at the same time, there are many people in the world today who really feel that there is really good ways of dealing with this, with technology. And like, so we should be putting real good, massive amounts of money into renewables and looking at, there's very, I mean, currently you can't do it just with renewables, that's the point. And I don't think any of the pro-nuclear people who I've interviewed are anti-nuclear or anti-renewable, except perhaps Michael Schellenberger, who calls them an abomination and a waste of resources and that. And there is people who say that kind of thing. But right now, I think we need everything. And
what I think is really important about that is also that you said that we will be 10 billion people and we will need more energy. And lots of people tell me in Europe, like, actually we should use less, we should consume less. And I completely agree that whatever we can consume less is great. If we are ready to make changes that actually use less resources, use less energy, that is great. Unfortunately, a lot of things in our societies already that are really polluting or really resource heavy can be solved if you use more clean electricity. Things like making steel or recycling more resources, then you need more clean electricity. So it's not so easy just to say
no, it's very, very complex. But can I just go back a little bit, because one of the most moving sections in the film is where you go to Chernobyl with Professor
Jim Smith.
Jim Smith, who I heard interviewed actually at the time the film was shown in the Dublin Documentary Festival,